The light arrived like a sound you could see, gold, not blinding, but insistently warm, pouring across the treatment table and pooling like oil around our feet. I remember thinking for a second that someone had left the studio lamp on, that the streetlights outside had found a way in. Then the hum began, low and steady under my ribs, as if the room itself had a heartbeat tuned to a deeper clock. My name is Sophia. I work with energy, Reiki, acupuncture, breathwork, things I learned over years of practice and years of quiet testing with people who came to me tired, broken, or simply curious. That afternoon, my client was Marcos, skeptical, precise, a software engineer who came in with a sore shoulder and an unwillingness to indulge what he called woo. He sat across from me, arms folded, watching me set up needles and light incense. I noticed the way his jaw softened when he exhaled. He noticed the way the air changed when the light poured over us. What happened next is the reason I am telling you this. It is the reason I keep replaying the moment in detail, because in that ordinary room, during an ordinary session, something extraordinary announced itself, and then, softer than a whisper, explained a secret about an object the world had been given a name for. 3I Atlas. They called it an interstellar comet. In my vision, it was not a comet at all. According to what I experienced, it was a constructed beacon, a device, an emissary, moving into the inner system and sending a frequency out into the solar neighborhood. Listen, I know that sounds enormous, and I know people will want proof, documents, white papers. I also know that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What I can offer you is a first-hand account, my experience, and the corroboration of another witness who was in the room, Marcos. What follows is what we saw, what we felt, and what we interpreted. I will label things as testimony and as vision where appropriate. I will not pretend these are peer-reviewed findings. I will also tell you how this changed us in practical ways, and how, in our view, others should prepare in the coming weeks. If this story touches something in you, curiosity, fear, a sense of recognition, stay with me. If you want updates as this unfolds and follow-up accounts from people who have felt shifts, subscribe and hit the bell. I'll be sharing what we learn and what credible witnesses report in the days ahead. There is a brief editorial note I want to place here up front. This is a personal account and interpretation of an event. It is not scientific proof or medical advice. It is not an instruction to stop any treatment. If you are experiencing health issues, please consult a licensed professional. With that said, let me bring you back to that room. The light did not come as a burst, but as a tide. It pooled near the ceiling first, a warm dome like the underside of a sunset, and then it dripped, slowly, down the walls with a soundless gravity. I felt it in my hands before I felt it anywhere else, my palms prickling with a pressure like the buildup before a thunderstorm. Then, in a voice that did not pass through my ears but through my head, the presence spoke. At first it was impressions, shapes, sensations, a cadence. Then words formed, not spoken aloud, but conveyed as if someone was placing a clear glass between our minds and sliding images across it. Marcos's eyes widened. He whispered, "Do you hear that?" He was the skeptic. He was steady and sensible, and in the timeline of my life, he is the person I most trusted to be honest about what he actually felt. He told me later, I couldn't tell whether it was inside my head or outside of me at all. It felt like someone touched a frequency I already had but had never used. In the sequence that followed, the presence offered a kind of guided projection. I was not leaving my body in the sense of running to another room. I felt my shoulders anchored and the light pulling my attention outward at the same time. The walls of the studio fell away like curtains, and we were moving through a corridor of stars. The being, call it the ethereal being, as Marcos and I do, was like a lens focusing our perception. It did not narrate like a person, it revealed like a translator of geometries. What we were shown was whether this object, called 3-Eye Atlas, was merely a wandering comet or something else. In that vision, the object assembled itself into geometry, spheres within lattices, nodes pulsing in a rhythm that felt akin to heartbeats, not random debris but organized architecture. The core thrummed, and that thrum was not merely light. It carried a patterned vibration, a pulsing pitch that the being translated as a language of resonance. The detail the being offered, this is a testimonial detail from the vision, was that the device emitted low-frequency pulses similar in character to what some call a 528 Hz range. I must mark that frequency label as indefinido, 528 Hz, per the witness. This is how it was described to me in the experience. It is not a measured, published frequency trace. I saw the pulses travel outward in concentric waves, not unlike rings from a pebble dropped into a pond. The waves passed through electromagnetic fields, through satellite arrays, through the thin skin of our biosphere, and then through us. The being made it clear, wordlessly first, then with the same compressed clarity as before, that the device did not alter our physical DNA sequence in the lab sense. Instead, it engaged regions of DNA that are often called non-coding in scientific language. In the metaphor I was given, these regions looked like filing cabinets with drawers nobody had pulled in a long time. The being described them as dormant programs, capacities waiting for a key. The account claims that when the beacon's frequency struck those dormant registers, certain capacities could be amplified. The being listed 5 primary capacities it said would emerge. I write them here as they were relayed to me in that state. 1. Amplified energy healing. An increased ability for those who already work with subtle energies to channel and accelerate recovery processes in others in ways that felt surprising and more precise. In my practice, the first week after the session, I noticed that a patient with chronic shoulder pain, different from Marcos, who had plateaued under conventional physiotherapy, reported a sudden downshift in pain after a series of targeted sessions. She described the relief as a pivot rather than a flicker. It was incremental but stable. I share this as anecdote and not as medical evidence. 2. Precise intuition. A sharpening of gut-level guidance into something more like clear sighting for decisions both practical and small. Marcos himself experienced this. A piece of code he had worked on for months suddenly presented a clear alternative in his mind, a different algorithmic path that solved a bug he'd been stuck on for days. He told me he didn't think the insight was from me or from external advice. It felt like an internal nudge that had changed from fuzz into a directive. 3. Early-stage telepathy. An initial capacity for consistent, low-bandwidth mind-to-mind resonance. This showed in tiny interchanges at first, finishing each other's sentences with uncanny precision, knowing when the other person was about to speak, or receiving images in the mind that matched the other's immediate sensory impression. Marcos and I discovered this awkwardly. He reached for the same glass of water I was reaching for. We laughed, but the laugh had the same sound as surprise. 4. Accelerated conscious manifestation. The sense that intention produced correlated shifts more quickly than before. This did not mean instant material wealth or miraculous cures. It meant small-scale, fast feedback loops. A person set an intention to reconnect with an old friend, and within a few days received a message. Someone else set an intention to find affordable housing and quickly zeroed in on a viable option. These occurrences were uneven and personal and certainly not universal, but enough people reported patterns to make us pay attention. 5. Direct felt connection to a creative or source intelligence. An experiential sense that one could access an abiding presence or organizing intelligence without intermediaries. For me, that appeared as a soft, abiding thread in the center of my chest when I closed my eyes. An inner environment that felt like home, like a lodged memory finally remembered. All of this was shown through scene and metaphor. The being did not lecture. Rather, it demonstrated each capacity by letting us feel its contour and then pointing to lives where the change was being lived. Notice I emphasize shown and allegedly emitting when I speak of the mechanism. These are the witness's words transposed into narrative.
When the vision shifted, we were no longer among the stars, but in a room that smelled of instruments and coffee, a control room, rows of people, faces lit by screens. In the vision, I watched them input data, debate language, and choose public phrasing. The impression given was that authorities assessed the anomaly, recognized organization where others saw randomness, and chose to present a simpler public narrative for reasons that felt practical, to avoid panic, to preserve stability while they gathered more data. I stress again, this is what I saw in the vision. It is an account of a possible action, not a documented memo. The decision-making felt bureaucratic and cautious, less conspiratorial, and more risk-averse. Classify, monitor, manage the narrative. Back in the Golden Room, the presence showed a timeline, compressed, visual, urgent. The pulse of the beacon, it said, was ramping up over a finite window. In my projection, that window narrowed to a period that resolved into approximately 10 weeks from the stabilization point we were shown. I label that timeline as indefinito, a witness-reported window indicating increasing emission culminating in a peak within an assumed 10-week arc. It's crucial to treat this as a claim from the vision, not as a calendar to bet against. Still, to the people who saw the pattern with me, it felt like a countdown, an opportunity and a pressure, a time to prepare rather than a deadline to fear. You might be wondering, why would an institution keep this secret? Why call something a comet when a device seems more consistent with what was seen? Again, the vision suggested neither malice nor monolithic control. It suggested practical constraints. Institutions prioritize stability. They classify unfamiliar data. They consult internal expertise, and they balance public trust against uncertainty. That process can result in a public story that understates complexities. That understating is what the being highlighted to us, that the publicly available language might not reflect the full interior observance. Marcos and I corroborated what we could. The experience had shared content, same images, same sense of geometry, same low hum. Where our interpretations diverged, we talked late into the night, walking the city and trying to translate metaphors into terms that would make sense to a skeptic and to a seeker alike. He pushed me. Sophia, tell me exactly when you felt your teeth vibrate. I told him, and he told me when he felt a pressure behind his eyes. We compared notes and found overlap. That overlap is part of why I trusted the vision enough to pass it forward. The visceral effects did not stop at the threshold of the studio. In the days that followed, small changes rippled through our routines. I began to notice patients reporting slight improvements faster than expected. Not cures, but shifts. One woman with a long-standing migraine pattern spoke of a new window of relief following guided breathwork. Marcos began waking with images that would become solutions in his workday. We both started experiencing synchronicities, an old song playing at a decisive moment, a message from a stranger that directly addressed an immediate question. People call these coincidences. We decided to call them data. These patterns prompted us to build practices around them, ways to help people navigate if they started to feel similar effects. Before I describe the practices, because I will, and because practical tools are the only antidote to being overwhelmed, I need to pause on the stakes the vision indicated. The being made a point to show not only possibility, but also friction. If a broad population begins to experience evidence of an activation, a felt increase in healing capacities, a rise in intuition, dreams that feel more directive, society is going to respond in predictable ways. The vision did not paint a single script, but a set of likely moves. One pattern it illustrated was pathologizing, framing experiences as mental health crises, pushing medication or institutionalization as primary responses. Another was distraction, a flood of media narratives designed to drown out personal testimony with noise. A third was regulation, attempts to codify or control practices labeled as non-standard or unproven.
I am not attributing criminal intent to institutions here. I am describing mechanisms the vision suggested as probable reactions to rapid, inexplicable change. That is the pressure. When something unknown becomes felt, people either integrate or recoil. Integration produces fewer avoidable harms. Recoil opens a space for suffering, for isolation, for forced quieting of those who need support. In that sense, the timeline the being showed was not merely about an emission curve. It was a window where social systems, even unintentionally, could choose to help or to constrain. So here is what Marcos and I started to do, practically, in the week after our session. Simple, low-risk practices intended to help integrate whatever was shifting without replacing therapy, medicine, or other professional care. I offer 3 concrete approaches we used and taught to others. They are not prescriptions. They are tools that helped us remain embodied and grounded amid a flurry of unusual experiences. First, breath work with intention. Sit or lie comfortably. Inhale to a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 6, and rest for a count of 2. Repeat this cycle for 5 to 10 minutes. Before starting, set an intention, something simple, like I intend to stay present, or I intend to notice what is useful. The breathing calms the nervous system and creates space for subtle impressions to arrive without panic. It also gave us an anchor when sudden visual or sensory shifts occurred. Second, synchronicity journaling. Keep a small notebook labeled Notable Alignments.
Each time something meaningful happens, an image, a dream, a coincidence that directly answers an open question, write the date, a short description, and the felt intensity on a 1 to 10 scale. Over days, patterns tend to emerge that help differentiate random chance from repeated signals. Marcos used a spreadsheet for this, tagging entries with categories like idea, contact, and dream. The act of recording itself grounds the experience in language and reduces the sense that one is being overwhelmed by chaos. Third, grounding practices. These are simple body-based acts, walking barefoot when possible, sinking into showers with the intention of reconnecting to the body, doing short sequences of stretching that demand attention to the joints. When the mind sped up, grounding pulled it back into the present. Many of the people we worked with found carrying a small textured stone in their pocket helped, something tactile to bring the attention to the body when mental noise rose. We also added 2 additional safety measures that were more about community practice than personal ritual. One was to create a witness circle among friends or fellow practitioners, a small group committed to listening without judgment when someone reported unusual experiences. The second was to maintain clear boundaries about medical care, explicitly encouraging people to consult professionals and making the distinction that complementary practices are companion practices, not replacements. You will hear, later in this account, more detailed stories of how the 5 capacities manifested in others. For now, I want to make a simple point. These early effects we experienced were uneven. Not everyone was touched, and for those who were, the qualities of the experience varied. Some people reported mostly increased intuition. Others reported shifts in their healing practice. That variability, to me, reinforced the idea that whatever was unfolding was less like a uniform download and more like a tuning, different sections of the orchestra responding to a conductor's baton in their own way. As the timeline tightened in my inner map, I began to see a different vector, validation. If one person has a vision, one story is easy to dismiss. If 2 people in the same space have overlapping imagery and reported overlapping after effects, the account becomes harder to dismiss outright. Marcos and I reached out carefully to a handful of people we trusted, a nurse friend who had reported an uptick in vivid dreams in her ward, an independent astronomer in a small observatory who had posted a cautious note online about odd signal fluctuations. His public note carefully avoided speculation. And a midwife who said she had seen a higher degree of intuitive diagnosis during deliveries over the previous week. We compared notes discreetly. None of these accounts were scientific proof. What they were, again, testimonial data, were patterns. I also began to pay attention to language. The being in the vision used metaphors I am still turning and polishing. It compared the beacon to a lighthouse more than to a weapon or a rescue ship. A lighthouse broadcasts information to guide vessels' behaviors. A beacon marks position and transmits orientation. If that metaphor holds, then our task is less about fighting a hidden enemy and more about learning how to read a new light. And yet, there was danger in reading without context. The being's portrayal of a choice point, acceptance versus denial, was not a moralistic ultimatum. It was practical. Societies that recognize and support emergent experiences minimize suffering. Societies that pathologize them create chains of isolation. Marcos and I, in our conversations, kept returning to a single sentence the being impressed on us. Awakening is an invitation. Free will is the doorway. It sounded poetic in the room, but to us it translated into concrete behaviors. Listen before you correct. Support before you diagnose. Validate experiences without making people dependent on you. There were, of course, those who would say this is all wishful thinking, a narrative for those who want to believe in benevolent forces. I meet that critique openly. My answer is not proof, but process. Document, corroborate, apply pragmatic practices, and maintain clear distinctions between personal testimony and institutional claims. That is why I keep using qualifying phrases. According to the witness, in the vision she observed, allegedly omitting. Those qualifiers are not hedges to be timid about the truth. They are necessary markers that respect both the power of the experience and the limits of its validation. One evening, a week after the session, Marcos told me something that tightened the knot of urgency in my chest. He logged into a public astronomy forum to ask a technical question and noticed a thread about an object labeled 3I Atlas. The thread was sparse, official-sounding, and carefully non-committal. People were arguing about its eccentricity, its trajectory, whether it was truly interstellar. There were hints of data, brightness changes, unexpected radio noise. None of it was conclusive. None of it, in the public sphere, used the word beacon. At the same time, in private messages, he had a short exchange with a person who said they had friends at observatories and had heard rumors of structured signals. That person cautioned him not to take the rumors as fact. The structure of this reaction, public caution, private curiosity, echoed what I had seen in my vision of the control room. It is possible, of course, that this is all coincidence. It is also possible that the pattern reflects how organizations behave when confronted with anomalies. Public steadiness, private digging. As the days lengthened, more people started reaching out to us with anecdotal reports, an uptick in prophetic dreams, a therapist noticing an increase in clients reporting heightened inner voices, a musician whose compositions began arriving fully formed after a meditative period. But again, these were early signals, not a chorus. I want to pause and emphasize something essential here. None of this is a promise. I will not tell you that anyone will be healed, that intuition will always be reliable, or that telepathy will replace language. What I can say is that the patterns were real enough for us to create a plan. Document the experience, share it with caution, prepare compassionately for people whose lives might tilt in new directions, and protect against premature institutional overreach that would pathologize rather than care for. That plan included deeper observation. We started a log system, time-stamped accounts of shifts we noticed, names of people who corroborated similar experiences, short audio notes of how sensations presented. We agreed, Marcos and I, that if anything escalated into clear, repeatable phenomena with independent measurements, we would alert independent researchers rather than sensationalize the story. Our orientation was toward caution, documentation, and compassionate community support. The vision had left us with a final, alarming image before it receded. Concentric waves growing brighter, a peak of luminous intensity that resolved into a choice point. The being did not prescribe what must be done. It only insisted on readiness and on a willingness to bear witness. Witness, it conveyed, is the first medicine. That sentence echoed in me like a bell. In the early nights after the session, the bell rang again and again. People who had never told us their inner lives were now sending messages. I had a dream last night that felt different. I woke with words that I couldn't place. I suddenly knew what to call my work.
Some messages were banal, some were heartbreaking. Alongside the wonder was anxiety, people unsure if they were losing their minds or waking to something larger. I realized that if this was to be navigated without harm, we needed more than breath and journals. We needed a frame that allowed people to translate what they felt into serviceable language. We needed to be able to point to practices that kept people safe and embodied while letting them explore. So we began to assemble more resources: recorded breath sessions, templates for synchronicity logs, and a simple grounding practice you can do in less than 5 minutes when a surge of sensation threatens to become overwhelming. But we were not yet ready to open this to the world. The timeline, the indefinito, 10-week arc, pressed at our shoulders. We had to decide whom to trust, how to scale witness circles without becoming a megaphone for rumor, and how to document accounts with an ethical backbone. Marcos insisted on technical rigor.
"We need timestamps," he said. "We need reproducible checks that don't rely on charisma." I agreed. So we began collecting first-wave data in a modest way. Audio snippets, short written testimonies labeled with the degree of certainty, small-scale follow-ups asking whether effects persisted. We kept the sample small and careful, not because we doubted the experiences, but because we wanted integrity. It was during one of those late-night sessions of comparison, my notes against his, field reports against our diaries, that we saw something else, a subtle change in media tone. Not overt admissions, not dramatic headlines, but a shift in language. Papers that had used the word comet without discussion were now using qualifiers: anomalous, under review, object of interest. The change was too small to mean anything on its own, but when layered over our private data, it felt like a seam being exposed. And then a different kind of message arrived, not from a friend or a forum, but from a voice within our own circle, an invitation. A local group of practitioners wanted to meet and share experiences. No agenda, no promises, just listening. We accepted. In that living room, under soft lamps and with tea, 10 people began to speak. One by one, they spoke of dreams, of inexplicable clarity, of sudden shifts in energy. None were claiming miracles. None were asking for a mass awakening. They simply wanted to find a language and a practice for living through changes that felt real to them. It was in that room that I first felt the shape of a responsibility, not to convince, not to alarm, but to witness and to offer tools. The being in the vision had set a stage. The work we were called to do, if we accepted it, was human, bearing witness, creating systems of care, and sustaining curiosity without collapse. That is why I am sharing this now. I will stop here for a moment, because in the next section of this account, I will trace the technical sketch of how the being described the interaction between the beacon's pulses and human biology, and I will tell you longer stories of people who felt the 5 capacities begin to bloom. I will also share with you more detailed protocols we developed for the weeks approaching the peak. Ethical witnessing guidelines, how to document experiences without creating sensationalism, and how to build small, supportive communities. For now, carry with you 3 facts I want to be clear about. This is a witness account. The frequency detail is indefinido and reported from the vision, and the practices I described are supportive tools, not medical instructions. If you are watching this and have felt something similar, strange dreams, sudden intuition, a sense of being touched by a frequency you can't name, write it down. Keep the detail. There is power in careful record keeping. Above all, be kind to yourself and to others who may be frightened by their experiences. The world can respond with either care or quick dismissal. In the coming weeks, we will have the chance to influence which path we take. The light in the studio faded that afternoon as it had arrived, slowly, like a tide receding, leaving a dampness in the air and a sense of having touched something larger than ourselves. Marcos and I sat quietly for a long time, both of us aware that the life we'd been looking at had shifted its frame. I closed my eyes and felt, like a distant drum, the cadence of those 2 words again: witness and choice. The next steps would require courage, discipline, and compassion.
The weeks ahead would test not just our capacity to believe, but our willingness to hold space for others as they navigated what they were beginning to feel. There is more to tell, how the mechanism was described in greater, stranger detail, how early reports began to cluster around certain symptoms and gifts, and how, in small but significant ways, the outer world started to align its language with what we had been shown. But for now, this is the evidence we can offer: shared vision, corroborating witness, small-scale changes that were real enough to necessitate a plan. The beacon, if that is what 3i Atlas truly is, was turning its dial. The world, according to what we perceived, would soon notice in ways that could not be easily contained. We had less than 10 weeks, according to the vision's map, before a peak. The clock in my head began to tick louder. The clock in my head kept time like a faint metronome, and with each tick the world felt both larger and more fragile. Nights became times of mapping sensations. Mornings were for comparing notes. Marcos and I slipped into a rhythm: document, corroborate, teach, and above all, be careful with what we shared. The 10-week arc, indefinito, witness reported, was not a deadline we could check off. It was a pressure to do our work with integrity before more people were suddenly plunged into bewildering experience. 1 week after our original session, I sat with my eyes closed in an empty studio and asked the same presence, if it was listening, to clarify something practical. How precise was the interaction between the beacon's pulses and human biology? The answer returned not as a lecture, but as a sequence of images, as it had before: light falling into a library, drawers opening, inked pages turning. In the vision, the being used another metaphor to explain what it had shown earlier about DNA. If you can accept metaphor as a way of translating, the device was not rewriting the books, but illuminating footnotes and marginalia. Those annotations contained instructions, practice notes, cues for different sections of the book to begin acting. Again, this is how it was shown to me. It is not a laboratory report.
From those marginalia emerged an image of resonance, the beacon's pulse nested within ambient vibration, nudging certain regulatory systems, information pathways that in everyday language people sometimes call epigenetic signaling, though I must emphasize that the account is metaphorical. The being indicated that the frequency's role, allegedly centered in the indefinito 528 Hz range, was to synchronize small pockets of cellular behavior with broader patterns of field-like information. The effect, as described, was not wholesale rewriting, but the invitation to retrieve dormant programs, behaviors and sensitivities not actively used in daily life. What followed over the next weeks were more stories. I want to name some of them because telling the particular helps distinguish testimony from trope. These are not miracles guaranteed. These are testimonies, sometimes small, sometimes startling, always personal. Carla, a night nurse at a community hospital, contacted me after Marcos and I had discreetly shared our notes with a trusted circle. She said her unit had seen an unusual number of staff reporting vivid dreams that contained practical guidance. Dreams where a pattern in a patient's lab results resolved itself once a nurse remembered a small, precise intervention. Carla described one night where a patient's pain protocol needed adjustment. A junior nurse, newly attuned, suggested a repositioning and breath coaching that seemed to stabilize the patient. Carla emphasized that the team did nothing unprofessional. They used existing protocols but applied them with a new, precise sense of timing and attention. She called the changes micro-corrections, small, not miraculous, but meaningful. Jonas, an amateur astronomer who ran a small observatory outside the city, messaged Marcos after seeing a pattern he could not explain. He had been tracking 3i Atlas as part of a hobbyist group and observed changes in its brightness and in narrowband radio noise. He could not say it was engineered, he did not know, but he described sudden, structured pulses in a bandwidth he regularly checked, pulses that did not fit the broad spectrum he expected from a passing comet.
He used technical words carefully and finished his note with a sentence that felt like a confession. "I do not want to jump to conclusions. I only report anomalies." That carefulness was important to us. It echoed what we had seen in the control room vision: scrupulous, risk-averse people noticing data they could not yet seal into a public narrative. Leela, a midwife, told us about deliveries that had an odd clarity. Mothers who suddenly knew in the moment when to push, or who intuitively suggested positions that eased labor in ways that surprised the midwife. Leela was neither spiritual nor alarmist. She was practical and very tired. "It's like a different kind of listening," she said when we spoke. "Not supernatural, more like the body remembered something it had only half known."
She kept her notes in a folder and offered consent for us to read a few anonymized entries. Their tone was quiet, astonished, and grateful. Amir, a composer friend of a friend, wrote in a short, ecstatic email, "I meditated, and the next hour the piece fell into place. It was like someone handed me a completed phrase." He was careful to add that the effects were not constant. They arrived like visitors. Sometimes they left quickly. Sometimes they required work to translate into something useful. He sent an audio file of a melody that, when I heard it, had a certain clarity I could admit as unmistakable, a fully formed musical phrase that had been elusive the week before. Each of these accounts, when placed side by side with our vision, built a pattern that was not proof but was persuasive enough to continue gathering testimony. We did so with rules: anonymize where needed, avoid pushing people to dramatic claims, and always include the editorial marker: "This is a personal account and not medical or scientific advice." Those markers mattered because not every unusual experience is harmless. Some people who called us were frightened. Others were elated. We tried to be the slow voice in the moment. As more testimonies arrived, certain patterns emerged around the 5 capacities the being had enumerated. I'll go deeper into each, offering concrete anecdotes and practical boundaries for how to live with them. Remember, these are narratives of what we and others perceived after contact. They are not guarantees. 1. Amplified energy healing. A man named Thomas had come to my clinic for chronic inflammation that had responded only partially to physical therapy. After a few sessions where I applied targeted acupuncture and weaved breath work into the treatment, he reported an unexpected shift. The pain's edge receded in a way he described as permission to move differently. The shift was not instantaneous or total. It unfolded over days. Remarkably, Thomas later became a participant in an improvised healing circle where 3 people, trained helpers with varying levels of experience, worked with him. They reported coordinated shifts in their sense of what was happening energetically. One person saw a constricted area. Another had a clear intention to loosen it, and Thomas later described a loosening that matched both accounts. For us, the meaningful thing was not the claim of cure, but the coordination. People who had worked together before finding a new shared sensitivity. Practical boundary. Such coordination at its best involves consent, clarity of intent, and adherence to professional care where relevant. We never suggested replacing medical care. Thomas kept seeing his physician and continued his regimen. He simply used energy work as a companion practice. 2. Precise intuition. Marcos's software breakthrough is an example, and there were other humbler cases.
A teacher in our circle reported an immediate sense of which student needed attention in a crowded classroom, and her small intervention prevented a meltdown that day. The intuition did not give her a manual, it offered a pinpoint of attention. That kind of precision can be profoundly helpful if treated cautiously, applied to practical decisions rather than moralizing others' choices. Practical boundary. Test intuitive hits like hypotheses. Take small, low-risk steps to verify them. Note whether the insight leads to better outcomes. If not, recalibrate. 3. Early-stage telepathy. In its early form, this was clumsy and tender. Friends finishing sentences, knowing when the other would laugh, exchanging images that corresponded in timing. Over lunch one day, Marco's sister, visiting from out of town, described suddenly remembering the color of their grandmother's shawl, a color neither of them had mentioned, yet both had pictured. They laughed and felt a brief, uncanny tenderness. For us, early-stage telepathy looked like a mutual attunement to the present moment, not like the trope of full mind reading. Practical boundary. Assume privacy. Never probe someone's mind without consent. Use attunement to offer help, not to intrude. 4. Accelerated conscious manifestation. Small intentions yielding faster feedback loops. That was the pattern. People set concrete, specific intentions, e.g., send a message to someone with a precise sentence, and within a short period they received a reply. These were not universal. Many efforts produced no immediate result. The pattern's value was in practice, setting clearer intentions, noticing timing, and learning from outcome patterns. Practical boundary. Recognize survivorship bias. Not every successful intention becomes signal. Keep careful logs, a simple template we used: intention, date, method, follow-up outcome, felt intensity. Over weeks, patterns settle into something more legible. 5. Felt connection to a source intelligence. This was the most subjective and the most visceral. For some, it felt like a memory returning. For others, a steady, quiet center that reduced panic. I describe a woman in our circle, June, who had been bereaved months earlier. She spoke of a sensation like a warm thread running through her chest and said this presence held grief in a way that allowed integration rather than avoidance. Again, testimonial, not proof, life-changing for her. Practical boundary. Do not make universal theological claims. Treat such experiences as personal resources, not conversion tools. As we collected stories, we also watched for deterioration, cases where overwhelming experiences led to confusion. A young man, emotionally unprepared and isolated, experienced intense imagery that frightened him. He had no witness circle and no immediate support. He eventually reached out and was connected with a licensed counselor. The counselor helped him distinguish between symbolic imagery and actionable, reality-based choices. In such cases, professional mental health support was critical. This reinforced our principle: care, not medical replacement. Parallel to these human narratives were glimpses, again via vision or via indirect corroboration, of how broader systems might respond. The being's projection of institutional reaction was both practical and chilling in its banality. It suggested three likely vectors: medicalization, distraction, and regulation. Medicalization, framing unusual inner experiences primarily as pathology. This could involve overprescription or hurried diagnoses that erase nuance. The vision didn't accuse institutions of malice, it described mechanisms. When a system encounters a surge in reports it cannot explain, it defaults to frameworks it knows: diagnosis, standardization, treatment. Those frameworks can help people, but they can also flatten varied, meaningful experiences into a single medical box. Distraction, saturating public attention with irrelevant narratives to drown out coherent testimonies. In our circles, we saw early versions of this: sudden media cycles about celebrity scandals or manufactured outrages, synchronizing across platforms and consuming attention. The effect is not necessarily intentional at a centralized level. Boredom economics and rapid content cycles produce noise that makes sustained attention difficult. The being highlighted distraction as an efficient human response. If you cannot classify a pattern, make the public focus elsewhere. Regulation. The impulse to control practices that gain traction is real. If certain complementary practices become widespread, some authorities might propose licensing, oversight, or prohibitions. Regulation can protect people. It can also constrain emergent, harmless community practices when applied clumsily. The vision asked us to think ethically about both liberty and safety. We did not see a single plan to weaponize experience. What the being showed us instead was a set of probable social processes that, if unmanaged, could cause harm. The remedy, as the vision insisted, was local.
witness circles, ethical guidelines, and documentation that respected privacy and autonomy. From those recommendations, we built a set of ethical witnessing principles that we taught to small groups. They are simple and practical. 1. Consent, first and always. Before offering interpretation or healing, ask, "May I listen to what you experienced?" Do not push. If someone is distressed, help them connect with a professional. 2. Non-interpretive hearing. Resist the impulse to label someone's experience immediately. Instead, ask clarifying questions. When did this happen? What did you feel physically? What changed afterward? Hold space. Do not rush to metaphysical interpretation. 3. Documentation with dignity.
If people consent to record accounts, do so with timestamps, anonymization options, and the ability to delete. Use a simple template: date/time, basic description, felt intensity 1 to 10, any external correlates, medical events, dreams, media exposure, and whether the person sought professional help. Keep these logs secure and only share with explicit consent. 4. Referral networks. Build a small list of trusted professionals, therapists, physicians, spiritual counselors, so that when someone needs support, you can offer options, not directives. 5. Avoid proselytizing. Offer resources, but do not insist that an experience must be interpreted according to any single worldview. The being emphasized free will. Our practices must honor that. These principles guided our witness circles and helped many people avoid reactive paths. In practice, we ran sessions that lasted 90 minutes, 20 minutes for check-ins, 30 for sharing one person's experience in detail with group listening, no advice, 20 for integration tools, breath work and grounding, and 20 for referral planning. The structure was deliberately small and slow, because information spreads fastest when it's emotive and simple. We wanted to cultivate slow, careful dissemination. As we practiced care, subtle signs of broader change continued. A small online forum for amateur astronomers started including threads labeled "Unexplained Modulation," careful posts that noted narrowband variations and asked for peers to verify. A local university's physics department posted a public note saying it was monitoring an object. The language trembled between curiosity and caution. Again, these are public shifts we observed. They do not equate to proof of the beacon theory. They are, at minimum, a pattern. More people were paying attention. Not everyone reacted with curiosity. We encountered dismissive responses that ranged from polite skepticism to mockery. That was expected. We learned to hold skeptical engagement with respect. One of Marcos's friends, a cognitive scientist, emailed him a thoughtful critique of our methods and suggested additional controls for any data we intended to share publicly. Marcos read the critique twice and then invited the scientist to our small data review session. The scientist came and asked careful questions. How were we timestamping reports? How did we control for confirmation bias? That conversation, even though it was uncomfortable, improved our methods. It reminded us that good testimony survives rigorous questioning. Around the 4th week after the session, another pattern became more urgent. People started reporting sudden sensory overloads, headaches, ringing, dizziness, especially during moments of intense emotion. A few people reached out to emergency services before calming down. We started advising immediate grounding techniques if someone felt physically overwhelmed.
Simple steps. Sit, hydrate, breathe with a longer exhalation, touch something cool and textured. If symptoms persisted or worsened, seek medical help. This is not medical advice. This is a safety protocol we built from observation and common sense triage. In our community, we also experimented with small interventions to translate metaphors into embodied skills. For example, we created a 3-minute reset practice for people who felt a surge of unexpected imagery. Stop and label the sensation out loud. I am feeling intense imagery. Do 4 grounding breaths. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6. Place both feet flat on the floor and name 5 sensations. Pressure at the feet, the temperature of the air, the sound nearest to you, the weight of your clothes, the taste in your mouth.
If the imagery continues and is distressing, call or message a designated witness circle member. These micro-practices did not eliminate experiences. They helped prevent panic. As the timeline edged toward its middle, media cycles intensified, sometimes on unrelated topics that nevertheless occupied attention. We noticed marketplaces of distraction, flashy headlines, celebrity scandals, large financial news pushing into daily feeds. A friend described it as the world's habitable places of attention shrinking. People could only hold so much, and noise offered an easy way to avoid holding something difficult. We began to see the being's caution as both prescient and practical. The best defense against distraction, we found, was not argument, but presence, a steady local community that was not trying to win a debate, but to support people. We also anticipated attempts at institutional framing that would cast emergent experiences as pathology. Indeed, in week 6, a mainstream health columnist wrote a piece urging caution about mass suggestion, a term that positioned collective experiences as potentially delusional. The piece quoted psychologists urging standardized assessments. That article landed like a heavy object in our inboxes. We did not want to argue that no one should be cautious. Many of our own early recommendations emphasized professional assessment. But we feared a reflexive medicalization that would treat every unusual inner life as a disorder. That outcome would risk alienating people who needed community support and might push them into isolation. To counterbalance, we started a small educational series, short videos and handouts that explained what to do if you or someone you know experienced sudden visions, intuitive surges, or synchronicities. These materials emphasized consent, documentation, and referral rather than diagnosis. We circulated them in our small networks and offered them to local clinics gratis. The intention was modest: to give people phrases to name experiences without pathologizing them and to create clear steps for safety.
As the public environment shifted, we also observed the first alleged institutional internal statements. Not leaks or documents, but second-order reports from friends of friends in technical roles who preferred anonymity. They described cautious internal memos and supportive messages about monitoring unknown signals. We treated those reports carefully and always labeled them as indefinito or as reported to us in confidence. The being's depiction of bureaucratic caution fit these patterns. People are often more concerned with avoiding panic and legal exposure than with sealing a narrative of deception. In the 7th week, the experiential patterns intensified in our circles. The synchronicities increased in frequency for many. People reported chains of meaningful coincidences that seemed to link otherwise unconnected events. One example, a woman named Sarah had been seeking a kidney donor for a relative. She set a very precise intention: to be connected to someone who could offer help or useful information. Within days, a distant cousin reached out speculatively, offering to help coordinate resources and connecting Sarah with a support group that had donor leads. The outcome was not instantaneous. The donor question did not resolve overnight. But the chain of events moved faster and with an odd clarity. As these accelerations occurred, so did small-scale attempts to discredit. Trolls on social platforms posted caricatures of our witness circle. Some media pieces leaned on fear and labeled experiences as mass hysteria. We had to decide how to respond. Our policy: prioritize safety, not reputation. We continued to document, to anonymize, and to invite scientific curiosity rather than attack detractors. That posture, slow as it might have felt amidst loud critique, preserved our credibility with people who mattered most, those experiencing shifts and their loved ones. One crucial, delicate moment came in week 9. A friend of a friend who worked in a media analytics firm offered to run a non-invasive, anonymized scan of trending narratives. Out of caution, we accepted. The report showed surges in conversation around anxiety and mass suggestion, alongside an uptick in searches about energy healing and psychic dreams. The metrics were inconclusive in themselves, but they underscored the tension: a public conversation that could swing either towards supportive curiosity or toward reductive dismissal. And then the peak window began to feel less abstract. People's reports grew more intense. Not everyone experienced a crescendo.
Many did not. But enough people reported clear, undeniable moments that the term choice point the being had used returned with force. In our circles, the mantra became prepare, witness, and do no harm. We intensified our witness circles and offered additional trainings on documentation, trauma-informed listening, and how to triage someone who might be acutely distressed.
One practical method that helped many was what we called the 3 anchor protocol, which we taught and used when someone seemed flooded by experience. 1. Body anchor. Ask the person to name and press their feet intentionally to the ground. Describe 3 physical sensations. 2. Breath anchor. A 4-count inhale, hold 2, 6-count exhale for 5 cycles. 3. Social anchor. Call or message a pre-identified support contact. No analysis, just a human voice that says, "I'm with you." This protocol is not therapy. It is immediate triage. If symptoms continued, disorientation, persistent dissociation, self-harm ideation, we advised professional emergency help. As the days moved toward the projected peak, Marcos and I faced decisions about public sharing. Marcos leaned toward caution. I leaned toward openness. We struck a balance. A limited public release of our anonymized logs paired with an invitation for professionals to review them. We framed the release as an appeal for rigorous interest, not sensationalism. Shortly thereafter, an independent researcher, an epidemiologist with an interest in crowd phenomenon, contacted us. She agreed to look at our anonymized dataset if we would permit it. Her preliminary note was careful and dry. She saw signals of non-random clustering of reported experiences in both time and geography, but she warned against overinterpretation. That note, small as it was, felt like a doorway we had been trying to open, an invitation to move from testimony to careful inquiry. Then, on what we had mentally marked as a possible peak day in week 10, something subtle happened in the world. It was not dramatic or cinematic. It was a slow loosening. Smells seemed sharper to some people, colors brighter to others, and for a handful of individuals, an unmistakable inner clarity resolved a problem that had been stuck for months. News feeds for about 24 hours alternated between mundane headlines and a smattering of reports of unusual inner experiences. Nothing grand unfolded, nothing that confirmed the beacon theory in an irrefutable way. What occurred in our small data slice was that more people felt able to name what they had experienced and sought community. We responded by opening more witness sessions and by releasing a modest packet of resources in the pinned comment of a public post, a PDF template for synchronicity journaling, a short audio for the breath practice, and ethical guidelines for witness circles. That pinned packet is still there. That packet is one of the few CTAs I will ask of you. If you want practical tools and downloadable resources, check the pinned comment or the description below. There, you'll find the booklet and links to schedule a consultation if you need direct guidance. This is the second and final CTA in this account. In the weeks following the peak window, different things happened. Some people reported sustained changes. Others returned to baseline.
Some who had been frightened began to integrate their experiences with the help of professionals. The epidemiologist's preliminary analysis suggested that clusters of reports persisted beyond random chance, but she emphasized the need for systematic, controlled studies. We did what we could. We kept documenting, encouraged professional partnerships, and helped form small, local communities that were not evangelistic but were practical. What then of NASA? Of the title claim, NASA's Biggest Secret, the alien contact that could change everything about 3I Atlas. We walked a careful line. The being's vision had shown what looked like a control room and people who appeared to be assessing an anomaly and choosing a public narrative. Our observations, Jonas's narrowband notes, careful public language shifts by observatories, were suggestive of increased scrutiny. But we did not, and cannot, produce confirmation of an internal institutional secret. We could only say this. According to the witness, the control room scene suggested a classification and monitoring process that did not fully match the public language used in headlines.
That discrepancy, in our experience, explained why ordinary people noticed odd sensations before official narratives shifted. That distinction is important because the impulse to fill gaps with conspiracy can be irresistible. We resisted it by insisting on transparent methodology, time-stamped logs, anonymized data pools, and invitations to independent researchers. We made an explicit choice to pursue curiosity rather than accusation. The being's message about witness and free will guided that posture. Our work was not to indict, but to learn. What practical lessons, then, can I offer to someone watching this who might feel the tremor of something new in their life? Below are consolidated recommendations distilled from weeks of practice and from the experiences of dozens of people. They are simple, non-medical, and designed to help integrate unusual inner states with safety. 1. Daily micro-practices for grounding and clarity. Morning check-in, 3 minutes. Sit, breathe 3 slow cycles, ask yourself one question. What is one concrete thing I can do today that supports my body? Write it down. Evening synchronicity log, 5 minutes. Date, 1 sentence describing any meaningful coincidence, intensity 1 to 10, any external correlate. Keep it brief. Movement anchor, daily. 10 minutes of walking, stretching, or gentle yoga focused entirely on bodily sensations. 2. When striking inner imagery arrives. Use the 3 anchor protocol, body, breath, social. Label sensations out loud and record 1 short voice note describing where and when it happened. If the imagery is directive and asks for action affecting others, pause. Seek a neutral third-party perspective before acting, especially if health, property, or legal concerns are involved. 3. Community safeguards. Form witness circles of 4 to 8 people who agree to confidentiality and non-judgment. Rotate facilitation to avoid charisma bias. Keep a referral list of licensed mental health professionals and medical doctors to whom you can point someone in distress. 4. Documentation standards. Timestamp everything. Use neutral language in notes. Who, when, what, intensity, external events. Avoid retrofitting meaning. Record raw experience first, interpretation later. 5. Red flags requiring immediate professional help. Persistent disconnection from reality, inability to distinguish shared facts. Hearing commanding voices urging harm. Suicidal ideation or intent. Rapid, uncontrollable physical symptoms that do not resolve with simple grounding. If any of these occur, seek licensed care immediately. 6. For practitioners offering care. Obtain informed consent in writing before any energy work. Maintain clear boundaries regarding medical claims. Use trauma-informed practices and avoid re-traumatization. We never wanted to become a mass movement. We wanted to create pockets of care that were steady and competent. Witnessing, as the being said, was the first medicine. After months of practice, that claim felt true. Being heard without judgment helped many people stabilize. Documentation allowed us to notice patterns and to invite careful research. Ethics kept us humane. In the months after the 10-week arc, what we now call the stabilization period, small but meaningful changes continued to emerge. The independent research team published a cautious preprint noting non-random clustering of self-reported experiences. They emphasized confounders and called for more rigorous studies. A respected journal ran an editorial about the value of open science when dealing with anomalous reports. Small NGOs began to offer funding for exploratory, cross-disciplinary work. None of these developments amounted to an unambiguous confirmation of the being's claims, but they did open channels for curiosity and accountability. In our own lives, the changes continued in quieter ways. Marcos now schedules regular check-ins with a small group of peers who help him test intuitive hunches against data. He keeps his coding work disciplined with version controls and hypothesis tests. Heavens, he might joke, so he can tell which ideas actually solve problems and which feel like wishful thinking. I continue to practice carefully and to join witness circles. I still receive messages from people who have had experiences. Sometimes they are joyous, sometimes difficult.
I answer with the same thing the being impressed on us: witness, prepare, and do no harm. There were disappointments too. Some people we tried to help were met with suspicion in their workplaces. A few healing practitioners were criticized by local boards simply for saying they could not yet explain changes. We lobbied quietly for nuance, that professionals should not be punished for reporting unusual client experiences we cannot yet account for, but that they must also maintain medical ethics. Those conversations are ongoing and necessary. So where does this leave us with the title claim? I close with the honest center of what we learned. According to the witness, and corroborated by overlapping personal reports, the object cataloged as 3I/Atlas was shown in a vision not as a comet, but as a constructed beacon allegedly emitting patterned low-frequency pulses that intersected human fields of information. The control room scene in the vision suggested that institutional actors noticed anomalies and chose cautious public language. The broader pattern we documented was one of emergent sensitivities: amplified healing skills for some, sharper intuition for others, early mind-to-mind resonance, accelerated manifestation in particular circumstances, and a deep-felt contact with something many called a source intelligence. None of these things constitute scientific proof. They are, however, real in the lives of the people who reported them. If the possibility of such a shift troubles you, I want to offer a final plea for a measured human response. Choose compassion over dismissal, documentation over rumor, safety over drama. If you feel called to act, consider forming a small witness circle, begin careful journaling, and build connections with health professionals who are open-minded but ethical. One practical final note: this account is a personal testimony. It is not a replacement for medical or psychiatric care. If you are in need of medical help, please consult licensed professionals immediately. We included resources and a downloadable booklet with exercises, templates, and a short list of referral options in the pinned comment and description. If you want deeper guidance, you can find links there to schedule a consultation with our team. That link is offered as a resource, not a promise. We began this story in a small room with a golden light pooling like oil around our feet. We end, for now, with a responsibility: to witness without fear, to build systems of care, and to hold space for people as they navigate whatever comes next. NASA's biggest secret, if it exists in the form the vision described, is less an accusation and more an invitation to learn how to live with new sensitivity, and a reminder that the first response to the unknown should be care. If this resonated with you, and you want the practical tools I mentioned, breathwork audio, the synchronicity journal template, grounding exercises, they're available via the link in the description and the pinned comment. Use them gently, share them kindly, and if you experience something that frightens you, reach out to a trusted professional. For now, we continue to watch, to document, and to hold space. There is a choice ahead for all of us: to meet what we do not fully understand with curiosity and compassion, or to meet it with fear and dismissal. In our view, the act of witnessing, attentive, ethical, and kind, remains the first medicine.